For thousands of years, Earth was just another dot in the endless ocean of stars, unremarkable, unnoticed, and utterly forgettable to the rest of the galaxy. To the Galactic Council, the governing body of hundreds of advanced civilizations, our planet was listed in their databases as Sol 3, a standard code for the third rocky world orbiting a quiet yellow star in a quiet corner of the Milky Way. Nothing special. No rare minerals worth mining. No ancient ruins worth studying. No signs of dangerous technology. Just a blue-green marble teeming with noisy, squabbling creatures who hadn't even figured out how to stop fighting among themselves. The Council kept a light watch on Earth, mostly out of habit. Every few centuries, a low-level observer would skim through intercepted radio signals, music, news broadcasts, soap operas, and file a bland report. Species shows emotional complexity but limited strategic foresight. Recommend continued passive monitoring. Humans were seen as loud toddlers in a library full of scholars, energetic, occasionally charming, but not yet ready for the big conversations. Everything changed because of a single word. It started with a routine data sweep. Deep in the archives of Virelia, a moon-sized library drifting in the outer spiral arm, a young linguist was sorting through old human transmissions. Most of it was noise, pop songs, weather reports, arguments on talk radio. But something kept appearing again and again, not in official documents, but in poetry, in prayers, in the quiet lines of folk songs passed down for generations. The word was Terra. At first it seemed like just another name, like Gaia or Mother Earth, but the more the linguist dug, the more unsettling the pattern became. Ancient carvings in deserts, chants from mountain tribes, even modern environmental slogans, they all circled back to this one term. It wasn't just a label, it felt older, deeper, like it carried weight beyond language. Curious, the linguist ran Terra through the Council's oldest translation matrices, tools designed to decode the root meanings of words across dead and living tongues. The result made their hands shake in the Ya, primordial dialects of the first builders, the civilization that mapped the galaxy before time was measured in years. The word Terra didn't mean earth or soil. It meant the devourer that sleeps. The linguist didn't believe it at first. They ran the query again and again. Each time the same chilling definition surfaced, wrapped in layers of cosmic cautionary tales. According to fragmented records, Terra wasn't a place. It was an entity, a planetary consciousness so ancient it predated stars, and it had a terrifying reputation. Heart-pounding, the linguist compiled their findings into a formal briefing and sent it up the chain. Within hours, the message reached the highest chamber of the Galactic Council. The room fell dead silent. Council members, beings who had witnessed supernovas, negotiated peace between warring dimensions, and outlived entire species, stared at the report as if it were a live bomb. One elder, whose species had survived the great collapse of Andromeda, whispered a phrase in their native tongue that hadn't been spoken in 10,000 cycles. It's awake. But Earth looked so peaceful. Blue oceans, swirling white clouds, green continents. From space it looked like a cradle, not a coffin, yet the records didn't lie. Every time a civilization had tried to settle or study a world bearing that name, disaster followed, not from invasion, but from within. Societies would turn on themselves. Trust would vanish. Art would rot into propaganda. Love would twist into control. And in the end, they'd destroy everything they'd built, all while praising the very ground beneath their feet. The Council had assumed those stories were myths, cautionary fables told to keep young explorers from getting too curious. But now, with hard linguistic evidence linking Earth to Terra, the myth had teeth. Worse still, humans didn't seem afraid of the name. They used it proudly. Terra firma, terra incognita. Schoolchildren recited it in geography class. Poets wrote odes to it. It was woven into their identity like breath. They had no idea what they were invoking. Panic spread through the council halls. Emergency protocols were debated. Some argued for immediate quarantine, erecting an energy barrier around the solar system, cutting Earth off from the rest of the galaxy forever. Others warned that drawing attention to the planet might trigger whatever slumbering force resided within it. Naming it aloud could be like shaking a sleeping dragon, but the most unsettling question remained. Why had humans survived this long? Every other species that had lived on a Terra world had collapsed within a few generations. Yet humans had endured ice ages, plagues, world wars, and still kept going. They'd even begun reaching for the stars. Clumsily, yes, but with genuine wonder. They weren't just surviving on Terra, they were talking to it, singing to it, mourning its losses, planting trees in its name. That didn't fit the old records at all. As the council debated in hushed, urgent tones, a new transmission arrived from Earth, this time not a radio signal but a physical object, a tiny golden disk launched decades ago by humans, drifting near the edge of their solar system. On it were sounds of laughter, whale songs, thunderstorms, and a child's voice saying, "Hello from the children of planet Earth," and etched into its surface in dozens of languages was the phrase, "We come from Terra." The linguist who'd started it all stared at the playback. On the screen, Earth glowed softly against the black. It looked innocent, beautiful even, but now every council member saw it differently, not as a home but as a sleeping giant. And the humans? They weren't just inhabitants. They were the dream the giant was having. No one slept that night in the council chambers. Orders were issued. All observation of Sol 3 would continue, but under the strictest secrecy. No more casual scans, no more cultural sampling. From now on, Earth would be watched like a bomb with a flickering timer. And deep in the vaults of Virelia, the linguist quietly added a new note to the file. Subject species unaware of planetary designation's true meaning. Recommend extreme caution. Do not repeat the name aloud. But it was too late. The name had already been spoken, and somewhere far away on a quiet blue planet, the wind rustled through the trees, as if in answer. After the word Terra echoed through the Galactic Council chambers, silence didn't just fill the room. It clung to the walls like frost. No one moved. No one breathed. For beings who had seen galaxies born and die, who had rewritten the laws of physics for fun, this single syllable struck deeper than any weapon ever could. But panic doesn't last long in a room full of ancient minds. Soon, cold logic returned, and with it, a desperate need to understand. If Earth was truly Terra, then the Council had missed something enormous. They'd been watching the wrong things: human wars, their shaky rockets, their reality TV. They hadn't looked far enough back. So they turned to the oldest records in existence, texts so ancient they weren't stored on servers or crystals, but encoded in the spin of dead stars and the echoes of collapsed black holes. These weren't history books. They were warnings, carved by civilizations that no longer existed. Deep in the sealed vaults of the Grand Archive, the historian general, a being whose body was more memory than matter, unlocked a section marked with 3 red glyphs. Do not awaken. Inside lay the truth. Millions of years ago, long before humans walked upright, a wave of silence swept across a cluster of thriving star systems. Planets that had shimmered with light and music went dark, not from invasion, not from natural disaster, but from something far stranger. Their people turned on each other overnight. Trust vanished. Art became propaganda. Science twisted into control. Families forgot how to speak kindly. And in every case, the last transmissions sent into space all carried the same phrase, whispered in awe and terror: "We serve Terra." Then, silence. The Xanthari hegemony was the last known civilization to encounter Terra. They were brilliant, masters of bioengineering, capable of reshaping entire ecosystems in weeks. When they found a lush blue world in a quiet system, they saw paradise. They called it verdant hope. But the planet already had a name, buried in its soil, humming in its magnetic field, woven into the DNA of every living thing. Terra. At first, everything went smoothly. Crops grew faster. Animals were docile. The air tasted sweet. But within a single generation, something shifted. The Xanthari began having dreams, visions of roots growing through their cities, of oceans rising not to flood but to cleanse. They started building temples not to their gods but to the ground itself. They stopped exploring space. Instead, they dug deeper into the planet as if trying to hear its heartbeat. Then came the fractures. One faction claimed the planet wanted peace. Another said it demanded sacrifice. A third insisted only total obedience would please it. Arguments turned to riots. Riots turned to war. In less than 50 years, the Zenthari wiped themselves out, not with bombs but with belief. Their final message beamed into the void wasn't a cry for help. It was a hymn. Terra forgives. Terra renews. Terra consumes. After that, the Council erased all records of the planet. They declared the name forbidden. Any world suspected of being Terra was marked for eternal quarantine. No contact, no observation, not even a glance, but Earth had slipped through the cracks. Hidden behind a veil of cosmic dust and human noise, it had gone unnoticed until now. Back in the present, the Historian General stood before the Council, their voice low and heavy. "We thought Terra was a myth," they said, "a ghost story to scare young explorers. But it's real, and it's been here all along." The room stirred. One counselor asked the question everyone feared. Is it awake? No one knew. But Earth's humans were doing something no other Terra dwellers had ever done. They weren't just worshipping the planet, they were questioning it. They argued about climate, yes, but they also planted trees. They polluted oceans, but they also cleaned beaches. They built weapons, but they also sent messages of peace into space. They were messy, contradictory, and painfully aware of their own flaws. That was the strangest part. Previous Terra civilizations had fallen into blind devotion. But humans? They called their home Earth, Terra, the world, even this rock. Sometimes with love, sometimes with frustration, but always with a sense of partnership. They didn't see themselves as servants. They saw themselves as part of it, and the planet seemed to respond. Satellite data showed forests growing faster in regions where communities protected them, coral reefs recovering near villages that banned destructive fishing. Even weather patterns appeared to soften during moments of global unity, like after major disasters when the whole world sent aid and hope. It was as if Earth wasn't just a place. It was listening. This terrified the Council more than outright destruction ever could. Because if Terra had finally found a species that could coexist with it, not worship it, not fear it, but live with it, then everything they thought they knew about cosmic balance was wrong. Worse, what if Terra wasn't evil at all? What if it was simply misunderstood? A force of renewal, not ruin? A planetary immune system that only destroyed civilizations that refused to change? The implications were staggering. If humans could survive Terra, maybe others could too. Maybe the old records weren't warnings, but lessons. But the Council couldn't take that risk, not yet. One wrong move, a single aggressive scan, a careless transmission might trigger something irreversible. So they made a decision: no direct contact, no interference. Just watch and wait. Meanwhile, back on Earth, life went on as usual. A child laughed while chasing fireflies. A farmer checked his crops at dawn. A scientist stared at the stars through a backyard telescope, wondering if anyone out there was looking back. None of them knew that their entire planet had just been reclassified, not as a developing world, but as a sleeping god with a history of swallowing civilizations whole. And none of them knew that the reason they were still here, still breathing, still dreaming, might be because for the first time in cosmic history, Terra had found a voice that didn't just obey, but cared. The Galactic Council didn't send warships. They didn't fire warning shots or broadcast threats. Instead, they did something far quieter and far more desperate. They sent watchers. Not the usual kind who skimmed radio waves from light years away, but deep-cover observers, cloaked in silence, drifting just beyond the edge of human detection. Their mission wasn't to study technology or politics. It was to understand something far stranger: how humans lived with Terra, and why they hadn't been destroyed yet. From hidden vantage points near the moon and in the shadow of Mars, these observers watched Earth not as a planet, but as a relationship. And what they saw confused them deeply. Humans were messy. They argued over borders, hoarded resources, and sometimes hurt each other in ways that made even the oldest counselors wince. But then, in the same breath, they'd do something that defied every law of survival the galaxy had ever known. After a flood wiped out a village, strangers from across the world would send food, blankets, and messages of hope. When a forest burned, volunteers would show up with shovels and seedlings, working under the sun for weeks with no reward. And every year, without being told to, millions of people would pause on a single day just to clean up beaches, plant trees, or simply sit quietly and appreciate the sky. It wasn't perfect. Far from it. But it was real, and it was happening not because of orders from leaders, but because ordinary people chose it, again and again. The observers recorded it all. A fisherman releasing a turtle back into the sea, a teenager skipping lunch to feed stray dogs, a city turning off its lights for an hour so people could see the stars. These weren't grand gestures. They were small daily acts of care, and somehow the planet seemed to notice. Satellite scans, human-made but now studied with new eyes, showed something astonishing. In places where communities protected rivers, the water ran cleaner even downstream. Where people planted native flowers, bees returned in greater numbers. Even the air above cities that invested in green spaces held less poison. It wasn't magic. It was connection, as if Earth responded not to power but to attention. One observer, stationed near the rings of Saturn, watched a live feed from a school in a remote mountain village. The children were painting murals on their classroom walls, not of rockets or warriors, but of wolves, rivers, and old trees. Their teacher said, "This is our home. We don't own it. We belong to it." The observer replayed that sentence 10 times. In all their centuries of studying civilizations, they'd never heard a species describe itself as belonging to a planet. Everyone else claimed to own theirs. Back on Earth, humans had no idea they were being watched so closely. They were too busy living. A grandmother taught her grandchild how to compost kitchen scraps. A musician wrote a song about melting glaciers. A group of neighbors built a community garden on an empty lot, laughing as they got dirt under their nails. None of it seemed important in the grand scheme of things, but to the watchers it was revolutionary, because every other species that had lived on a Terra world had treated the planet like a resource to be used, or a god to be feared. Humans did neither. They treated Earth like a friend, a flawed, fragile, sometimes frustrating friend, but one worth fighting for. And the strangest part? Earth seemed to like it. The observers noticed subtle shifts. Storms that should have hit coastal towns veered away at the last minute. Droughts broke just as crops were about to fail. Even animal migrations aligned in ways that helped ecosystems heal faster. It wasn't obvious. It wasn't dramatic. But over time, the pattern was clear. Where humans showed care, the planet responded with grace. This terrified the Council more than any weapon ever could. Because if Terra wasn't a destroyer, but a partner, then everything they'd believed for millions of years was wrong. And if humans had unlocked that truth by accident, through simple acts of kindness and respect, what did that say about the rest of the galaxy? Some counselors argued that humans were just lucky. Others insisted it was temporary, that sooner or later greed would win and Terra would reset the cycle as it always had. But the observers on the ground weren't so sure. They'd seen humans mourn extinct species. They'd seen them cry over polluted oceans. They'd seen them change their habits, not because they had to, but because they wanted to. One night, an observer watched a live stream from a city park. Hundreds of people had gathered, not for a concert or a protest, but for a silent walk, a tradition where they walked together in quiet, just to feel the earth beneath their feet and listen to the wind. No speeches, no signs, just presence. The observer, who had witnessed the fall of empires, felt something unfamiliar: hope. But hope was dangerous. Because if humans truly had a bond with Terra, then the Council couldn't treat Earth like a threat to be contained. They'd have to treat it like an equal, and that idea shook the very foundation of galactic order. Still, they couldn't ignore the past. The ruins of the Xanthari were real. The silence of 100 dead worlds was real. So the Council remained frozen, caught between fear and wonder. Meanwhile, back on Earth, a little girl placed a handmade bird feeder outside her window. She filled it with seeds every morning, even in the rain. She didn't know her planet had a name that made galaxies tremble. She didn't know she was part of a cosmic experiment older than stars. She just knew the birds looked hungry, and somewhere deep in the soil, in the roots of ancient trees, in the pulse of the tides, something stirred. Not in anger, not in hunger, but in quiet recognition. The Watchers saw it too, and for the first time in eons they wondered, maybe Terra wasn't waiting to devour, maybe it was waiting to be understood. The moment that changed everything didn't come with explosions or alien landings. It came on a quiet piece of metal, drifting alone through the cold dark between stars. A tiny disk no bigger than a dinner plate covered in golden foil. It had been launched decades ago by humans, not as a weapon or a warning, but as a hello. A message in a bottle tossed into the endless ocean of space. The Galactic Council had known about it for years. They'd scanned it, decoded its sounds, even chuckled at the odd mix of whale songs, thunderstorms, and a child's voice saying, "Hello from the children of planet Earth." To them, it was charming, naive, harmless, but this time, they looked closer, etched into the disk's surface. In dozens of human languages, some ancient, some still spoken, was a simple line: "We are from Terra, not Sol 3, not Earth, not the third planet. Terra." The word hit the council like a thunderclap, because this wasn't just a name. It was an introduction, a declaration, and in the oldest cosmic laws, to speak a true name, not in fear, not in worship, but in simple truth, was to invite recognition. To say, "Here we are. This is who we are. This is where we belong," panic flared again. Some counselors demanded the disk be destroyed immediately. Others argued that erasing it would be like tearing a page from the universe's memory, and that might anger Terra more than anything. The historian general, weary but resolute, stood before the chamber and said something no one expected. "We cannot hide from a name that has already been spoken. We must answer it not with silence but with respect." And so, against every protocol, against centuries of fear, the council made a choice. They would not quarantine Earth. They would not erase its records. Instead, they would do the one thing no civilization had ever dared to do before. They would acknowledge Terra by name, in full, in public, in ceremony, on the central platform of the Council's grand chamber. Under a sky filled with 1,000 alien suns, the Grand Arbiter stepped forward. Around them, representatives from hundreds of worlds watched in stunned silence. No one had spoken the name aloud in over 60 million years. To do so now was like lighting a match in a room full of gas. The Arbiter took a deep breath. Their voice, usually calm and measured, trembled just slightly as they spoke the forbidden word into the cosmic record. Terra. The moment the syllable left their lips, something shifted, not in the room but in the stars themselves. Across the galaxy, every star in the Milky Way flickered, just once, like a breath held and released. On Earth, people noticed it too. Not everyone, but enough. In cities and villages, on mountaintops and beaches, people stopped what they were doing and looked up. The auroras, normally seen only near the poles, blazed in colors no one had ever recorded, dancing across skies from the equator to the poles. The air felt softer. The wind carried a strange calm, like the world had just sighed in relief. A fisherman in a small coastal town dropped his net and stared at the sky, tears in his eyes, though he didn't know why. A scientist monitoring solar flares blinked at her screen, confused. The data made no sense. A child sleeping in a tent woke up smiling, as if hearing a lullaby only they could hear. None of them knew about the council. None of them knew their planet's name had just been spoken in the halls of cosmic power. But Earth knew, and it responded, not with fire or fury, but with light. Back in the council chamber, silence returned. But this time it wasn't the silence of fear. It was the silence of awe. The Grand Arbiter stood still, eyes closed, feeling something they hadn't felt in millennia. Peace. Not the peace of control or order, but the peace of being seen, truly seen for what they were. And in that moment they understood. Terra wasn't a monster. It was a mirror. It showed civilizations exactly who they were, selfish or generous, fearful or brave, broken or healing. Humans, for all their noise and mistakes, had chosen again and again to lean toward care. And Terra had leaned back. The ceremony ended. No fanfare. No celebration. Just a quiet closing of the record with the word Terra now officially entered. Not as a threat, but as a presence. From that day on, the Council changed its approach. No more hiding. No more pretending Earth didn't matter. Instead, they began studying human culture not as a curiosity, but as a guide. They listened to human music not for its notes, but for its longing. They read human poetry, not for its beauty, but for its honesty about pain and hope. They watched how humans apologized to rivers, thanked trees, and grieved for species lost. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. And real, they were starting to realize, was more powerful than perfect. Meanwhile, on Earth, life went on. People argued. They made mistakes. They forgot to recycle. They hurt each other. But they also held hands in hospitals. They shared food with strangers. They planted gardens in broken neighborhoods. They kept trying, and the planet kept breathing with them. No one on Earth knew that their simple act of naming their home, of calling it Terra with love, not fear, had just rewritten the galaxy's oldest story. They didn't need to know. What mattered was that they kept living as if the world was worth loving, as if their small choices mattered, because in the end that's what had saved them, not technology, not weapons, not cleverness, just the quiet, stubborn act of caring and having the courage to say, out loud, this is our home, and somewhere, in the deep hum of the planet's core, in the rustle of leaves and the crash of waves, Terra whispered back, I know. After the name was spoken and the stars flickered, the Galactic Council didn't throw a celebration. They didn't send messages of peace or open diplomatic channels. Instead, they did something far more telling. They went quiet. Officially, Earth vanished from every public record. Trade routes bent around the solar system like water flowing around a stone. New explorers were taught to avoid that part of the galaxy altogether. On paper, Sol 3 simply didn't exist. But behind closed doors, everything changed. In the deepest vaults of the Council's knowledge centers, a new kind of study began, not of human weapons or energy sources, but of human songs, stories, and the way they treated the smallest living things. Council scholars pored over recordings of children talking to pets, farmers saving bees, cities turning rooftops into gardens. They watched how humans mourned forests lost to fire, and how they cheered when a river ran clean again after decades of pollution. It wasn't logic that fascinated them. It was something softer, harder to measure, the way humans kept trying even when they failed. They began to see something no other species had ever shown them, that healing wasn't weakness. That caring for your home wasn't foolish. It was the bravest thing a civilization could do. Still, the Council never made contact. They knew better than to interfere. Terra had accepted their acknowledgement, but that didn't mean it wanted visitors. So they watched from a distance like respectful guests outside a sacred space, learning in silence. And Earth? Earth kept doing what it always did, breathing, growing, changing. Humans still argued. They still made mistakes. But they also kept planting trees whose shade they'd never sit under. They kept cleaning beaches they didn't own. They kept whispering thank you to the rain, the soil, the sky, sometimes out of habit, sometimes out of deep, quiet love. None of them knew they'd become the galaxy's quiet teachers. None of them knew that beings older than mountains were studying their lullabies and their protests, their art and their apologies to the natural world, searching for clues on how to live without destroying everything around them. But the truth was spreading, quietly, through the stars, not as a warning anymore, but as a possibility. In time, other worlds began to change too, not because of orders from the Council, but because young thinkers in distant systems started asking new questions. What if we stopped taking and started listening? What if our planet isn't ours to own, but ours to protect? Slowly, carefully, some civilizations began shifting, planting native seeds instead of importing alien crops, honoring animal migrations instead of paving over them, measuring progress not by how much they built, but by how much life thrived around them. It wasn't fast. It wasn't perfect. But it was happening, and at the heart of it all was a small, blue world that had once been feared as a devourer, but was now seen as something far more powerful. A teacher. Back on Earth, life moved at its usual messy, beautiful pace. A teenager posted a video about saving sea turtles and millions watched. A village rebuilt after a storm using only local wood and shared labor. Scientists shared data openly, not for profit, but because they believed knowledge should help everyone. These weren't grand events that made headlines across galaxies. They were ordinary moments, but together, they formed a language the universe was finally starting to understand, the language of care. The Council never told humans what they'd learned. They didn't need to. The change was already happening from within, and perhaps that was the real lesson. True wisdom isn't given. It's grown slowly from the ground up. In the highest chamber of the Council, Where decisions that shaped star systems were once made with cold calculation, a new directive was carved into a slab of black stone, not with lasers or tools, but by hand. In the oldest script known, let them name us next. It was a humble hope, a quiet surrender. After eons of believing they were the wise ones, the advanced ones, the ones who had all the answers, the Council had finally realized something profound. Maybe the most advanced civilization isn't the one that conquers the most worlds, but the one that learns to live gently on just one. And Earth, with all its noise and chaos and heart, had shown them how. Years passed. Generations rose and fell. Humans still looked up at the stars, wondering if anyone was out there. They sent more messages, built better telescopes, dreamed of meeting other minds. They never knew how deeply they'd already been seen, or how much they'd already changed the cosmos just by being themselves. But sometimes, on clear nights when the wind was soft and the world felt still, people would feel a strange sense of peace, as if the universe was holding its breath, watching them with something like pride. And maybe it was. Because in the end, the galaxy hadn't been saved by weapons or super science. It had been softened by a species that kept choosing kindness even when it was hard, that kept calling their home by its true name, not in fear, but in love. Terra hadn't devoured them, it had trusted them, and in return, they had shown the stars what it means to belong, not to a planet, but to each other and to the living world that holds us all. No grand finale, no final battle, just a quiet understanding, rippling outward through time and space, that the most powerful force in the universe isn't destruction, it's care. And Earth, for all its flaws, had never stopped practicing it.